Well, hello everyone. And as always, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're joining us from. Hope everyone's enjoying the day 3 of the Aquatic Life Conference. I don't know how it's already day 3, but we hope that everyone has been learning a lot and taking away a lot from the last few days. So for those who don't know me, I'm Wasim Imam and I'm a researcher here at ALI. And before we begin, just some housekeeping reminders for attendees. As always, the audience are muted upon entry with cameras off. Feel free to post any questions you may have in the question and answer box, and we will answer them at the end. And all sessions are being recorded and streamed, as with all sessions so far, yesterday and the day before. We, of course, expect discussions to be respectful and productive, and will not tolerate harassment or discrimination of any kind. So this particular session is a bit longer than the others. It's an hour and 10 minutes. So we'll have a number of presentations and hopefully 20, maybe 10 minutes or so at the end for questions and answers. So our third panel of the day. So today, the theme for today is neglected research areas and species. And the topic of this panel is on capture fisheries welfare, which is definitely a neglected topic. Animal welfare concern in capture fisheries is almost non-existent. So our speakers today will shed light on the suffering that happens in open waters and discuss possible welfare interventions. And we'll hear about what one fishing company is already doing. And we're delighted to have with us here 5 speakers representing the advocacy sector as well as research and industry. So first we'll hear from Phil Brooke, who is the Research and Education Manager at Compassion World Farming. His presentation is a joint effort between himself and Alison Mood from Fish Count. I believe Phil will discuss the suffering of fish during capture, landing and dying, and give us an idea of the sheer numbers involved, numbers of fish that is. He'll also describe some of the methods of humane slaughter and discuss issues around the so-called reduction fisheries. After that, we'll hear from Doug Waley, who leads the fish welfare program at the Eurogroup for Animals. Those of you who joined us yesterday might remember we started the panel and he was a speaker on that panel. And so he will discuss ways that we can improve the welfare during capture and landing and some of the research and work that they've been doing on welfare issues in capture fisheries. After that, we'll hear from Everette Anderson, who is the Senior Vice President at Bristol Bay Native Corporation, which is based in Alaska. So Everette will speak about the philosophy behind his company and why they acquired Blue North. And he'll be followed by Mike Burns, who is the co-founder of Blue North. For those who are not familiar with it, Blue North is the only vessel in North America with moon pool technology and one of the only vessels in the world to implement humane harvest practices. So Mike will walk us through how he got Blue North from vision to reality and how and now that's operating in the Bering Sea. And he also talked about the ethical treatment of the fish, as well as the safety and comfort of the crew and the health of their customers. And after that, we have Dr. Hans van der Fisch, who is a senior researcher at the Department of Animal Health and Welfare at Wageningen, Livestock Research in the Netherlands. And he is undoubtedly an authority on the topic of humane slaughter techniques in aquaculture. So Hans will present their latest project on stunning fish at sea and some of the challenges that they have encountered. So there should be 4 presentations there, well, 4 or 5, and hopefully 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. So without further ado, Phil, the floor is yours.
Hopefully the full screen is now up. It is on my one. I noticed that the camera picture doesn't seem to be working elsewhere, but hopefully you can see my presentation. I'm going to give a very quick overview presentation jointly between Compassion and World Farming, myself and Alison Mood from Fish Count, which I'll be presenting. As Wasim has said, I'm going to be giving you a quick overview of the suffering, the different stages of wild fishing, and some ideas for reducing suffering. And you're going to be hearing some practical examples, which is the most important thing of all, afterwards. The numbers Alison has calculated in most recent years come out as between 1 and 2 trillion. That's American trillion, billion, million, sorry, fish that are caught every year from the wild. That's, as Colin Brown pointed out, is a conservative estimate. It doesn't include unrecorded capture such as bycatch. The suffering of fish is very severe during capture. Duration is not a lifetime, but can be hours or even days, and that is a very long time to be suffering severely. If we look at one measure of welfare, the severity times the duration times the numbers, all of these are high, making wild fish welfare a very substantial animal welfare problem. If you want to reduce welfare by a lot, then this is a field to be in. Bear in mind, there's also suffering when fishes are used as bait and for bycatch. Let's have a look at suffering during capture, when they may suffer because of the weight of other fish on top of them. They may suffer electrocution during pulse fishing, from decompression, exploded swim bladders as they're pulled up from the deep. Their sensitive gills may be snared by gill nets, confined and crowded in seine nets. Large fish like tuna may be gaffed to bring them on board with hooks. And a lot of fish are, of course, caught on hooks. And fish on hooks or in nets may remain there for hours or days. Research suggests that fish are likely to die during capture very commonly, or to be injured, affecting fish quality due to the method, due to how long the capturing process takes, or due to how many fish are pushed and crushed together. On landing, how long they're exposed, the gear design makes a difference, how soft it is, nature of the hooks. We've talked about pressure and depth, but temperature is another issue. The bottom of the sea, lower in the sea, stays a constant temperature, but the upper end goes up or down with the summer or winter, and coming through that temperature change is clearly a stressor for fish, and size matters too. Welfare during landing, you can see exposure to air, you can see crushing under each other in the picture there, or under people who are working on the nets, and rough treatment, for example, as, I'm sorry, I went one too far there, rough treatment as these fish are being dropped down unceremoniously into the hold below. And after they land there, they will mostly die from suffocation in air, except for an unfortunate group who may be gutted or otherwise processed alive. Chilling of fish may actually extend their suffering. It's often said to reduce it, but in lowering metabolism, lowers oxygen use, these may last for longer. And animals take a long time to die. One Dutch study, a lot of the research I'm referring to is Hans van der Wies's, and you'll be hearing from him later. Over an hour to several hours to die from lack of air. If you gut the animals first, they can still take 25 minutes to over an hour to asphyxiate, even with having lost their guts first. And the part of the point is some of these kinds of fish, the flatfish, the cod, that live at the bottom of the sea where there's often not much oxygen, are adapted to low oxygen levels. And that means they take a long time to die. Another study suggests that cod and haddock were still conscious 2 hours after landing. And an important finding here was they looked unconscious for about an hour, after which they appeared not to move at all. But the brain tests suggested that they were still conscious 2 hours later, and may have been for much longer. That's when the experiment ended. The OIE, the International Veterinary Organization, has suggested that a range of methods used for farm fish, and the principle applies to wild ones too, are inhumane and should be avoided. leaving them to suffocate in air or ice slurry. Carbon dioxide, even worse, very, very aversive gas, bleeding them without stunning them first, or eels put into salt or ammonia, all cruel methods of killing. And I would add decapitation, since a decapitated head remains conscious of a cold-blooded creature for quite a long time. That's an inhumane method. Also, this should be unthinkable, to put a live fish on a hook. Many fishers do this, and other fish, say pole and line fishing, live fish may be scattered into a shoal of tuna to cause the feeding frenzy. Just imagine what that's like for the fish suddenly put amongst predators, and large numbers of them. There's capture-based aquaculture, cod that are caught, shall we say, in the middle of winter, but are not wanted for market till months later, may be stored, say, in Norwegian farming. And again, they may not eat. This is another practice that adds to the suffering of fish. So how can we reduce the suffering? I know we have next, after our session, a session with an example of people looking at how we can reduce the numbers caught. If we didn't kill half the fish for fish meal and oil, that would reduce numbers. Bycatch is an obvious example. Perhaps if we reduce fishing efforts, left them to grow a bit larger, we could get the same amount of fish for fewer fish, if that makes sense. Another clear way of reducing it. Reserves are going to help that process, and finding alternatives to eating fish, because frankly, we already know that the oceans are overfished. There's a limit to aquaculture. We need alternative foods. Fishing for fish meal and oil, as was pointed out by Albin yesterday, it might only be 25% of the catch by weight, but by numbers, these fish are small. It's more than half of them. And Alison, the fish count, has calculated that somewhere between 500 and 1100 billion fish per year are caught to feed aquaculture and other farming, 75% for aquaculture. Bear in mind, aquaculture is about 100 billion fish, so there's 5 to 10 caught to feed them, and they will die in pretty horrible ways. And there is a possibility, there's the mesopelagic fish. These are things like lanternfish, about 5 grams, say, possibly 2, pearl sides caught by the Norwegians, less than 1 gram. Total biomass of 10 to 20 billion tons. We are talking quadrillions of fish out there, possibly tens of quadrillions. Even if quite a small proportion of these were caught to make fish meal and oil, and it may or may not prove economic and practical to do this, could mean trillions, tens, even hundreds of trillions more fish caught to make fish meal. How do we avoid it? Many have been suggesting we go down trophic levels. Mussels, for example, can be kept naturally, and they're feeding from the water at the bottom of the food chain, where it has minimal ecological effect. We might, if we must keep carnivorous fish, and I think we possibly shouldn't be for farming, perhaps we can turn to other sources of protein and oil, or use trimmings from dead fish. Again, that was suggested on Monday by one of our speakers. There's a range of ways of reducing suffering during capture, which Doug is going to be talking about later, so I will leave this just as a list. And likewise, as well as gentler capture, we can also look at gentler methods of landing. Those are both extremely important, but will only reduce suffering if we can also do something about humane slaughter. And some of you may wonder what that word means. It means, I'm defining it as slaughter without suffering, which can be achieved in one of 3 ways. The animal is killed instantly, which is fairly rare. The animal is instantly stunned and then killed before it recovers consciousness, and most of our methods will use that approach. Or you might have a method that takes longer, but the fish doesn't mind it. It's non-aversive. Potentially humane methods then of stunning would be the percussive stunning, which is probably the main method used today and the best developed probably. We have methods of electrical stunning, and we have, and by the way, both of those must be finished by a killing method, or they will recover. And there's spiking, which instantly kills them, and the brain is destroyed by a spike. Potentially humane methods of killing, though, if you have stunned them first electrically or percussively, then bleeding, decapitating, or ice slurry may be humane, provided you can prove that they don't come round before they die. Instant killing methods, we've mentioned spiking. The other two are shooting is just for farm tuna. Electrocution are methods yet to be developed, but ultra high pulse stunning with a very, very high level of electricity for a very, very short period of time, which could result in an instant kill, is something to hope for in the future. And potentially non-aversive kills like anesthetics, clove oil is used in some countries, not allowed in the EU. But bear in mind that for some animals, it's aversive. And with wild fisheries where you may be getting lots of different species at once, this may not be practical. A quick look at a video of wild salmon being killed using methods developed for farmed salmon. So that is probably a practical method, but for fish of a known size, which they would be in the case of salmon, but most wild fish will not all be the same size. Semi-dry electric stunners are being used and are already commonly being used, but not for welfare reasons, for worker safety. A cod which is not flashing around is safer to gut than one that is flashing around. Likewise, you'll get more fillet yield because you can be more accurate, and you can get them frozen more quickly, so that's good for food quality. And it's being used already, these Optima stunners, for a wide range of fish. But be aware that they're not necessarily applying the right welfare protocols to make sure that this works well. But Hans and his various teams have come up with stunning parameters for a wide range of wild fish that mean that in practice, we have a start on trying to develop semi-dry electric stunning for these species, and more work going on into other methods. And the advantage of this is they're using it already. We've got the stunning parameters, but with risks. For safety, you might just use a lower current, and that means they immobilize. As Albin said Albin said yesterday, there's a million ways to torture a fish with electricity, and that is what you would be doing if you don't use enough current to stun them properly. Likewise, a problem, can you stun them for long enough because of the speed at which you're trying to work? Again, there's a risk they recover consciousness. You must have a humane killing method applied, and all this kind of equipment needs properly checking against the parameters that have been developing the lab that say that's what that kills according to the brain analysis. There's also electric stunners, which is another method where the fish are stunned within the thing. It can be narrower or wider according to the number of fish coming through. And if you they need to be stunned for longer, there are also conveyor versions of this potentially available. I think this is possibly the better long-term method for stunning, but we're waiting for the parameters to be worked out. But I think we're going to be hearing an exciting example of something like this being used by the Blue North people. And I'll be really interested to see how this one works. But they're going straight from the pump into the stunner where they can be stunned. And I think this is another method that's likely to be well developed in the future. All methods have to be used properly, or there are risks to the animal. I'm not going to stop in detail, but I think that's straightforward. If you don't do it right, you can make welfare worse. You can destroy the brain with a sharp implement, and there is this icky gun in Australia available for anglers, but in principle, that kind of thing could be done with any small-scale fisher who's trying to kill them. We need to humanely kill lobsters and cephalopods, as was discussed earlier, and the Humane Slaughter Association is currently researching into these, into better methods of slaughtering these animals when caught from the wild. Thank you very much. More details in these references here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Phil. A really great overview of the welfare issues in fisheries and the various stunning technologies that are possible. Wow, 1 to 2 trillion fish is truly staggering. And that percussive stunning video is quite something. But it's good to know that there are some low-hanging fruit in there, that they're, using different gear can have welfare, improve welfare. So yeah, I'm also looking forward to hearing the example from the industry. I hand it over to you, Doug.
Thank you. Let me just get my slides shared. So I hope you're seeing my front slide there. Yeah, I'm Fish Welfare Program Leader from Eurogroup for Animals. We are an umbrella organisation of 82 animal advocacy organisations based in Brussels, and our main work is political advocacy towards the EU political institutions in coordinating and convening amongst our member organisations. And I'm going to present today a fairly quick summary of recommendations for improved welfare in wild capture fisheries that we developed in our working group of members, where we discussed a lot of the information that Phil's presented to you today. And I'm giving you a summary of the recommendations that came out of that exercise. I'm not going to spend long on slaughter at all, being well covered by others on the panel today, but it's also our work on, and that the principles that are now principles and technology that are pretty well established in aquaculture are the right things to look at and bring into wild capture fisheries. So there's the stunning with immediate effect and killing before consciousness is recovered, and then we think of slaughter and the related operations. So it's minimum time out of water before stunning and gentle handling, things like that. And a lot of that is it's important to look at the design and layout of equipment on a boat and how can that time out of water be minimized and made more gentle. So I will go on to recommendations that are specific to the capture methods, the capture period and the capture method. And we first with this set of recommendations that apply across fishing methods. First up, minimizing the capture period, touched on already, but that is necessary to reduce the time that fish endure exhaustion, crowding, crushing, asphyxiation, physical injuries, and also exposure to predators before they're brought on board the boat. So all of that linked to how long the gear spends in the water. Minimizing the towing speed. That's also important to increase chances for non-target fish to escape, and also to reduce physical injuries from net contact, causing asphyxiation and physical injuries. Setting maximum target catch volumes is also connected to a lot of the same welfare impacts. That important measure to reduce the crushing pressure, causing asphyxiation and physical injuries, and preventing technical problems arising from trying to haul.
I think we lost Doug. Oh, there he's back. We lost you there, Doug. You're talking about the physical injuries, I believe.
Thanks. My Zoom closed and I'm just coming back. So Yeah, minimizing the capture depth is related to those pressure injuries and the temperature change Phil mentioned, and as is minimizing the ascent rate. That's also relevant to the pressure change and resulting injuries, and softer material and knotless construction for all nets reduces physical injuries from net contact. And also relevant across fishing methods is for fish welfare and these practices. And so I will moving on to a series of recommendations specific to different fishing practices. Trawling. Have you got my trawl slide? Are you seeing that? Yeah. Here we go. And this could be a pelagic trawl in open water, which usually target a single species like mackerel or herring. It could be a bottom trawl targeting demersal species like cod or flatfish, or beam trawl, a form of bottom trawling for flatfish with a heavy beam at the holding the net open. And recommendations here to look at the design of the cod end, where the risk of crushing and injury is especially high, and looking at designing that with softer materials and a shape that can distribute pressure suitably for the volume of fish held in the net. And trawl wings they're solid objects being pulled through the water and should be made with smooth surfaces and no sharp protrusions. And it's fish should be brought on board by pump rather than lifting them out of the water, and that avoids time out of water and also reduces crushing and injuries and asphyxiation when hauling the fish on board a boat. The use of pumps is already established on quite a number of, especially I think, pelagic seine boats and some trawl boats as well. Some recommendations for seine fishing when the net is put out in a circle around fish and then closed, especially used to target pelagic species, sometimes for demersal species. Here, crowding is again a principle taken from best aquaculture practice, that it's best to crowd fish up to densities that avoid vigorous escape attempts or maximal stress response from the fish. And there's, in terms of collecting them and lift, to be that dense. And again, bringing fish on board by a pump is especially suited to seine fishing. Some recommendations on hanging nets. Drift nets mainly used to target pelagic species, and fixed hanging nets used to target demersal species. Thicker twines here, so some fishermen use them, some fishermen use fine and monofilaments that dig deeper into the flesh of the fish and cause worse injuries. And there's the length of the net and the time that it's in the water. Deployed reduce indiscriminate catch of non-target animals, and how long the net is in the water is relevant to how long those fish are exposed to predators from which they can't escape. And recommendations on hook and line used to target pelagic and demersal species. There's a lot you can look at with the design of the hook. Barbless hooks and circle rather than J-style hooks cause less damage in the mouth, and especially important, they're easier to remove from the fish without causing more damage. Gentle, it should be careful, and it should be by hand, with automated machines that are used today, often tearing flesh and tearing the hook from the mouth. And also final recommendation that the use of live bait shouldn't be used in the context Phil presented earlier. And thank you for your attention on those. I look forward to your questions, and I'll take the chance to point you at all of this in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. We seem to have all kind of internet problems today, so I'm not sure what's going on there, but thanks for coming back, and glad it worked out in the end. And actually, I read the report myself, and I have to say it's very nicely summarized the recommendations. So well done on that piece of work. So let's move on to Everett and Mike. I think Everett, you're up first. Floor is yours.
Thanks, Wasim. Here, let me pull up my screen. Let me see. Can you all see a seine boat there? Thank you, Phil. Very nice to meet you all, and thanks Wasim and ALI for allowing us to be here today. So I know the focus isn't necessarily on Bristol Bay Native Corporation. It's more the focus on what Mike and his brother have brought to the table in terms of the technology that's being used in the Bering Sea Aleutian Islands. But I really felt like after talking to Chris that I wanted to provide just a little bit of just super brief context about why or how I should say Bristol Bay Native Corporation and Mike and the Blue North Company ended up together. So I'm just gonna go quickly here. I'm happy to talk to folks offline about who BBNC is, what we do. Hold on one second, let's fix this. Can you see that map on the screen there? Hold on. Having some difficulties here. Is that small or large? Can you see that?
It looks fine to me, normal size.
It is normal sized. Okay, good. So anyway, in the lower left-hand corner there, you see Bristol Bay. That is roughly the size of the state of Wisconsin in the United States. It's about 40 million acres. The number of residents in the region is about 7,500. We're all made up of Yupik, Dena'ina, and Alutiiq heritage. So this was an area that usually a lot of people congregated many, many years ago to follow the fish. There's roughly about 3 million acres that Bristol Bay Native Corporation oversees. Many village corporations. There's 31 villages in the region that we work with, and about 31 federally recognized tribes in the Bristol Bay region. So you can see, if you can see where my little cursor is here, this area right here is known to the rest of the United States and the globe as the last remaining largest wild sockeye salmon fishery in the world. And it's very important from a cultural perspective and traditional perspective as well. So Bristol Bay Native Corporation, we were formed in 1971. There are 12 Alaska Native corporations. Again, if you look at this map, you'll see 12 different regions. The passage of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act basically put these regions into more or less a for-profit status. They're a little bit different than lower 48 United States tribal reservations. And we were provided land and were provided money in order to start to identify investments that make sense to the region and ultimately what it means to give back to our shareholders. Our mission is enriching our native way of life. And so our commitment is focused a lot on our people, our shareholders, of which we have about 11,000 shareholders who are of original shareholder status or descendants of original shareholders. And so these are people that are connected to the region, like myself, that have been connected to the region for thousands of years. So seafood has been a very integral part of who we are as a people. We give back in the form of dividends, employment, educational opportunities, cultural programs. And the prior panel talked about, the people, planet, profit. I would say that we probably were doing this for quite a long time, didn't quite have the more technical definition of what we were actually doing, but we've been doing this for a long time, taking care of our people, taking care of our resources and our land. And for those of you that grew up potentially subsisting off the land like I did, using the seafood or the land animals or the birds to help keep our families fed, sharing the food, all part of a very unique cultural tie to each other. There's a very strong reverence for the animal. there's a very high regard to the fish, to the animals that we were using to feed ourselves and take care of each other. So with that super brief background, just on our companies, where we came from 50 years ago at the passage of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act to where we are today, we have 5 business lines: construction, government services, industrial services, tourism, and then what we're here to talk about today is seafood. So back in the late 70s, Bristol Bay Native Corporation was involved with the ownership of Peter Pan Seafoods, again, primarily focused on sockeye salmon. The corporation at that time sold Peter Pan in 1979, 1980. And then we took a hiatus from seafood. It was just a time that there were other focuses and other investments. But fast forward to 2019 of October, Bristol Bay Native Corporation got back into the seafood business in a pretty significant way. And part of the approach to the investment was, yes, there's a large quota ownership associated with the Blue North and Clipper operations, but what else were these companies bringing to the table that was different than kind of practices, things done in the past? And so what we recognize is that Mike, through Mike and his brother on the Blue North side of the business, they really have been more or less visionaries, and I shouldn't say visionaries anymore because it is reality. We actually have a vessel that is sitting on the water that harvests and treats the resource in a different way that is not seen anywhere else. And so we acquired both the Blue North and Clipper Seafoods operations, merged those companies that kind of led us here today. So the only reason, Wasim and the panel and others that are listening, that I wanted to be able to give a little bit of context to why we're here is there is a kind of a deeper meaning than just some corporate approach to ownership. There's a pretty significant meaning here to not just from a cultural and traditional perspective, but how we look at doing business moving into the future. And of course, and why we're here to talk about the Blue North operation. So I'm really proud to, we have our Bristol Wave operation, which is the combined Blue North and Clipper, and then we have our value add and marketing sales arm as well, which goes out and speaks specifically to what the Blue North operation does. Reaching out to broadline food distributors, talking to other category managers about some of the operations and the importance of starting to understand and embrace what some of the technologies and understanding of operations could look like in their efforts in getting the word out. So with that, I'm going to stop there, and happy to talk to folks offline about anything else that we may be doing. But really the focus is here for Mike. So thanks, Wasim, for that quick run through. And Mike, it's yours. I think you should see your boat up there.
Okay. I don't see the boat, but Stu, you still got the map on there, Everett. So everybody can hear me? Yeah, okay. All right, well, thanks for inviting me. I'll give you a real brief rundown of what my brother and I started many years ago fishing in Alaska, particularly the Bering Sea. And it was about 2012, 13 that we decided that we could build a new boat. And we're involved in long lining, which I think probably everybody knows is a long line, typically 40 miles of line that has a hook about every 3 feet. It's baited with most likely squid from actually Argentina. So when it came time for us to build a boat, I've never been one to go with the status quo, and we started researching, well, what's the state-of-the-art longliner, and that happens in Norway. Those Norwegians lead the world in fishing boat design and technology. So we went to Norway and discovered that they were building longliners with a moon pool, which is a 5-foot diameter tube that actually extends from the main deck, the fishing deck, all the way through the bottom of the boat to the ocean. And that is where they draw the line. They bait the line going off the stern of the vessel, and then they draw it up through the moon pool and to harvest the fish. So that there's many advantages to that, particularly for crew safety, because traditionally a guy's hanging off the side of the vessel, not literally, but there's an opening on the side of the vessel where he's actively has to gaff every hook or every fish to bring them into the boat. So in the moon pool, so we decided to do that, much to the chagrin of the industry in Alaska, where they said, oh, it's never going to work. But at the same time, my brother and I are also involved in the cattle business in Oregon. And we had been very familiar with Ellen Savory and that whole bunch, but more particularly Temple Grandin and all her work to gentle treatment and humane treatment of livestock, particularly cattle in this instance. And that's what I was familiar with. And when we were designing this boat, I thought, well, how could I extend that treatment of livestock to fish, which is something that I had never really heard of. But I thought, well, why not? Because I do believe that fish are sentient beings. And so we spent time trying to figure out how to stun a wild capture fish. It's much easier to deal with, as everybody knows. With salmon, they're all the same size, but on a codfish wild capture boat, the fish are 3 pounds to 20 pounds, but more typically in the 10 to 12 pound average. So we went through a bunch of testing, and we came up with the electrical stunner, which is basically so we don't need to gaff the fish because we're using the moon pool. Fish comes out of the water and literally within a second is pulled across the stun table and rendered, the nervous system is rendered asleep. From there, it's very quickly bled and then sent into the bleed tanks where the fish expires, and then on through to the rest of the processing. So that is really, it in a nutshell. I know I'm going fairly quickly here because we're kind of short on time, but we did take our fish to a professor at the Washington State University, where we did a blind test where the fish that are harvested traditionally, which is typically gaffed on board, left to expire, just like Phil described, either, bleeding to death or asphyxiating and all those sort of things. And a fish that was harvested and stunned almost immediately. And the results were better than we could have imagined. That the health benefits, the fish products that come from a stunned, humanely harvested fish are far superior, not only in shelf life, but in drip loss and all those kind of marketable things, but also in the health aspects. And if anybody's, because when a fish is suffering, there's cortisol and adrenaline and all sorts of other things that are going on in the muscle. And all that information is available on our website, or you can email me directly and I can send all that stuff to you. So what we found out, though, in the end was, through using a moon pool technology and the stunning, we were able to not only produce a better fish, more ethically treated fish, but it was also better for the crew and ultimately better for the health of our oceans. So I think I'll stop there, and if anybody has any questions, I can certainly take it on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to both of you. Thank you to Everett for that really inspiring story about BBNC. It's always nice to it's a nice reminder of the cultural context and that you need to look after your people, of course. And I'm sure I'll have members of the audience reaching out to you offline. I saw some comments there. And thanks, Mike, for the detailed description of moon pool technology. And of course, it's always nice to hear people from the industry agreeing that fish do stuff better. So thanks. I think Everett
It's a lonely position.
Definitely. Everett, do you want to share that slide?
Yes, please. Yeah, and Mike, this is what I was trying to provide to the rest of the panel and the attendees here. Just a quick view of the vessel and some of the facts, if you will. Maybe you can walk through just some of the the capacity of the operation, and
Yeah, sure.
kind of highlight some of those items there.
Yeah, it's a large vessel. It's the largest longliner in the Bering Sea. There are similar vessels to this in Norway, and that's actually where, as I mentioned, where the Norwegians designed this boat, and that's where this whole idea came from. But this is the only vessel in the U.S. or in Alaska like this that has this moon pool in it, and also we are of course the only vessel that's humanely harvesting fish or stunning them. We do have an onboard fillet machine, which is also unique to this vessel, so that we can produce once frozen at sea humanely harvested codfish, which is the finest codfish bar none in the world. So it's a large boat. It's a very, people referred to it when it showed up in Seattle during the christening. They referred to it as a fishing yacht. The crew accommodations are very untypical. The largest, I should say, there's a 2-man staterooms, which is not very typical on vessels. Typically, you have more people than that in a room. So there's 2 people in a room, and every room has its own bathroom. So the accommodations are very nice. And we tried to use as much automation as we could in the vessel with automatic freezers. So to cut down on lifting the activities of the crew, in terms of cutting back on carpal tunnel and all those sort of injuries that typically happen with fishermen. So like I said, it's a large boat. It can haul over 1.5 million pounds in the hold. And as you can see there, it harvests a lot of pounds per day. We typically run 60,000 baited hooks per day. Ever chime in if you got anything else, Robert?
No, all I was going to say is maybe talk about some of the bycatch and the minimizing bycatch as well, which is one of the areas that I know is unique to an area that we have a very high.
Yeah. Okay. Good point. So with this moon pool, so we actually have the fish are coming up, and any fish that we are prohibited from harvesting, particularly halibut. There's actually a guy in a basket that's down in that pool. His feet are very close to the water, and there's cameras underneath the ship and in the pool, so that the captain can see if it's a codfish or a halibut or whatever else is coming up, and he can alert the guy in the basket if he needs to release the fish. And so when that happens, the guy in the basket can dehook the halibut without injury, and the fish falls into the moon pool and then just swims back down the tube and back down to the ocean. So unlike a lot of traditional boats where the bycatch actually ends up on board and whatnot, Not halibut though, because that's a very strict, restricted species. But we do, with this moon pool, we basically can return all the fish that we don't harvest back to the ocean unharmed.
Yeah, very interesting. I'll stop sharing now unless you have anything else you wanted to. Okay. Okay, over to you, Hans. The floor is yours.
Just a minute, please. I will share my presentation. One moment. Oh yeah, here it is. I will put it now on presentation mode. Can you all see this? Okay, great. This is just a brief introduction of a recently started project in the Netherlands. We focus on stunning of captured demersal fish species, and the target species are plaice and turbot. And this project is headed by 3 persons. Hendrik Kramer, he is one of the owners of a fishing company. He was the main applicant for the project proposal. And Hendrik, together with Michelle Boonstra from Wageningen Marine Research and myself, the 3 of us, we managed this project. I now move on to the next slide, and we all feel it's a challenge, because when you're talking about demersal fish species, it's mixed fisheries. There are a lot of other fish species present in the catch. There can be bycatch present in the catch, and so you can imagine that it is really not like stunning of, let's say, Atlantic salmon in a slaughterhouse that is land-based. So what we're aiming for is to improve welfare of captured fish. We want to operationalize stunning of captured plaice and turbot. We want to do that in seawater, not dry stunning. And obviously, we want to ensure that when the consumer buys fish, that indeed it originates from a vessel that has put stunning of these species into practice. And for that, we also want to assist consumers to make an informed choice when they are in a supermarket or a fishmonger. And because obviously a fishing company has to invest, they have to purchase a stunner. So we also are thinking about business models to valorize the sea products that were stunned. And because we think that this is also a transition that is needed. So the project also aims at contribution of support by stakeholders. We think that is really highly relevant. Now I move on to the next slide. And this is to summarize the partners in the project. As I mentioned, MDV here, that is Hendrik Kramer is one of the co-owners, and this is the vessel, one of the vessels they've got. Wageningen Livestock Research and Wageningen Marine Research, these institutes are part of the organization Wageningen University Research. The company Fish Management Systems, that is based in Northern Ireland, they design and construct stunners for stunning of fish in water. The Good Fish Foundation, they own the fish guide, and this fish guide can be used as an app by consumers to make an informed choice, so they can make a decision, okay, I really want to purchase a fish that has been produced in a more sustainable way. So the fish guides help them, it helps them with that. And last but not least, and when we are talking about transition, we feel it's very important to educate people. So ProSea is also involved. ProSea is an organization that is educating people who want to have a job in the fisheries sector, or people who are already working in the fisheries sector. I move on to the next slide. So this is the overall structure of our project. The project started in March this year, and it will last for 3 years. And this is the steps we will carry out for stunning and killing of captured place and turbot. We will establish the specifications using EG registrations. So we record the electrical activity in the brains. We will do that, of course, in laboratory setting. And these specifications are used to design and construct a stunner. And then we will carry out test board of a vessel. When you're talking about valorization, of course, traceability is an issue. The product needs to be visible for consumers. They need to be able to make an informed choice. So we will perform consumer research. We will carry out supply chain results, and we will perform economic analysis to see how can these products be valorized. Because we feel that this is really a transition that is very important. We also focus on communication, dissemination to support this transition. So we have a communication plan in place, but that will change in the course of the project. We have started with stakeholder meetings. We have met with NGOs. We will meet with government organizations. We will meet with fishermen. Obviously, we also want to publish the results we obtained in trade journals and scientific journals. We want to present the project at conferences, at exhibitions, and we will produce fact sheets with infographics. And as I said, ProC will focus on education. I move on to the next slide. Obviously, the project is a real challenge. So we have go, no go decisions moments in the projects. And one of the decision moments is, are we able to establish specifications for effective stunning and killing of place and turbot? The second go, no go decision moment is it feasible indeed to implement stunning of these species into practice? And last but not least, is valorization possible? I now move on to the next slide. The way we are working on stunning of fish and how to put it into practice, we follow the advice of the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA. The first advice on how to put stunning into practice was published in 2013, and it was revised in 2018. The first step in the revise is to establish specifications in a laboratory setting to achieve an immediate stun, because in case of electricity, if you do not achieve an immediate stun, it can be painful, and obviously the fish should not recover. We use EG registrations for that. In the second step, we perform experiments in a commercial setting, and in a commercial setting, obviously, you cannot register EGs. We will see that the voltage and the amperage that were established in the first step, that these conditions are met when the equipment is used. But there are other criteria that have to be met. No pre-shock, so the fish that are in the stunner should not touch the fish that are just in front of the stunner. Even when the fish loses consciousness immediately, carcass damage can occur. That is not a welfare issue, but it's definitely an economic issue. So you want to avoid that. You want to achieve the required production rate. It should be safe for the workers. And a very important criteria is that bycatch that has to be released into the sea should not be passed to the stunner. That's very important. Well, it has been shown in other presentations, and so I'm not going to talk about this a lot, but in case of fisheries, we are talking about an accumulation of stressors during capture, during retrieval, during handling. And in this project, we focus on processing aboard, shown by this red circle or ellipse. And obviously, when fish are able to escape from the net, they can also be exposed to all kinds of stressors. This had been published in a very good chapter written by Mike Breen. To summarize, we carry out this work because fish are sentient animals. The project consortium wants to contribute to a transition in processing of demersal fish aboard. Hopefully, this project can be a blueprint for processing of demersal fish aboard. We want to disseminate knowledge obtained to facilitate the use of it aboard of other fishing vessels that capture demersal fish. Valorization is key. We focus on education. And as I said at the beginning, it is indeed a challenge, but we love to go the extra mile. And last but not least, a part of the budget is paid by open philanthropy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Hans, for that. Always very fascinating to hear about your research, and good luck with that project. Looks very promising. So that's the end of the presentations. Thank you very much to all 5 panelists for those very insightful presentations and for opening our eyes to some of the terrible suffering that fish can experience in capture fisheries, and also some of the things that we can do to alleviate their suffering. It's definitely been a topic that has been neglected for a long time. So it's great to see so many initiatives, and we commend Bristol Bay and Blue North for starting to put some of these findings in practice. Unfortunately, most of the industry is actually ignoring the issue, and it's refreshing to see some companies taking welfare into consideration. This is a kind of productive dialogue and collaboration we'd like to see more of in the future. Okay, so let us move on to questions. The first question for Mike, a clarification question actually. Could you expand on what you mean by fish care being better for the crew? Is it related to the fish capture's psychological impacts on the crew, or is it just that it's physically easier for the crew?
It's physically easier and safer for the crew. Yeah, so.
Short and sweet, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so the second question, also for Mike and Everette, what do you think will encourage the fishing industry to change? Education, financial incentives, and what does BBNC see as the biggest opportunities and barriers to humane harvest practices and technologies?
Yeah, I'll say, it's economic. Right now, there has to be a premium paid for humanely harvested fish. Without that, there's not much incentive for the industry in general to go along with this. Like I said earlier, it's a lonely place for me in Everette. We don't get a lot of encouragement or acceptance from other companies. They almost feel like they're threatened by what we're doing. They don't like anything to be differentiated. And there's so there's also a problem of it's very difficult to do this on a large scale, like on a large scale trawler, for all the reasons that Phil brought up. And but on a longliner, because we catch one fish at a time, it comes up. It's a beautiful scenario for stunning and humane harvest. So the other gear types, they don't like that we can differentiate excuse me, ourselves with a better product. But ultimately, I think it's going to come down to the consumer. Is the consumer going to demand that the fish that they eat are humanely treated or not? That's what it comes down to. But I'll defer to Everette, see what he has to say.
No, those are great points, Mike. All I can do, I think at this point, is just kind of piggyback on what you've offered there. one of the bigger challenges is this ongoing awareness with major retail, food service, broadline distribution. You know, there's a big focus on moving as much product through from point A to point B as humanly possible, without taking into account, you know, all the various impacts that may be happening to a fishery, to the actual the animal itself, to the operation. So there's a lot of awareness and a lot of money that will have to go into being able to promote the message and share that message. So awareness is probably one of the biggest challenges we're going to have here in the near term. You know, Mike, your boat came online in 2016, 2015.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is what Mike has done. He and his brother is really kind of it's pioneering a whole new area. And some of these things are going to take a little bit of time, but these types of events, this type of awareness that you've invited us to through the Aquatic Life Institute, and being able to hear Doug and Hans and Phil provide some of your information, this is all part of this ongoing education process. And so I just would encourage that we continue, and I know this is what you're doing, Wasim, and your team, that this is, you know, an ongoing process. Operationally speaking, we have Mike's vessel, which is state of the art for the Bering Sea, Aleutian Islands, and in North America, for that matter, in the longline sector. We have a lot of boats that were they were manufactured, fabricated in 1946 that are still being used. You know, there's some operational things that have to change as well. That is going to require some investment, and I think we're willing to make that investment if we can also see some of that pull coming through on the other side, that there's going to be a realization that what we're trying to accomplish is for kind of a greater message, a greater position that we're trying to take. And so a lot of things need to happen. Again, I would love things to happen right overnight, but to see where Mike started from vision to getting that boat on the water and actually doing it shows it is possible. It is the will to do it. And then on the some of our other vessels, it might not even be a very significant cost to do to try to reconfigure some of those operations on board vessels in order to get to where Mike has gotten the Blue North vessel. I know it's a lot of bits and pieces, but we all have to be kind of pulling in the same direction and focusing on awareness and education, and also the benefits of this for the long term.
Oh yes, absolutely. I think it's crucial, and like you said, it's a dialogue, and there's lots to be reiterated and done again. So I'll move on to the next question. For Hans, how will you decide what stunning technology you incorporate and appropriate settings? Will you be evaluating various electrode configurations and waveforms? And there's another question also. Please tell us about your experience for the use of combined current AC and DC for effective stunning of fish. I guess there's quite a lot of questions in there. We only have a couple of minutes. So do you want to choose which ones you feel best suited or positioned to answer?
Yes, this is really a very detailed question, but that's okay. No, the kind of waveform that is used is very important. When you are, for instance, using an alternating current, in case of Atlantic salmon, the fish can be stunned immediately, no problem, but you will end up with a lot of blood spots in the fillets. And that's why the company Optimar in Norway, they use a direct current combined with 100 Hertz alternating current. Yes, sorry, it's so technical, but and because of this waveform, they managed to really reduce the number of carcass problems in the stunned salmon significantly, and that is why the industry accepted it. And one of the reasons why we decided to start a collaboration with fish management systems is that in case of demersal fisheries, usually the available space aboard a vessel is very small. And in case of stunning of fish in water, there's more flexibility to implement the method. Dry stunning of captured fish or farmed fish can be in principle a sound method. But we think it's also important to develop stunning in water to a full extent, so companies have got something to choose when they want to apply electrical stunning. And we know from experience with stunning of eel, European eel, that when stunning in water is applied, this whole system can be more flexible. So we think that also developing stunning in water will give probably the best chance to really get it fully operational in practice. So there are two methods available. So that was our way of thinking.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Completely over my head, but that answered. We're actually getting a lot of questions in, so we've been given permission to run over slightly. I hope that is not major inconvenience to the panelists. So the next question for all or anyone who feels they would like to, how can welfare be enforced at sea? I guess talking about animal welfare here. Can we use existing laws and technology related to bycatch, catch quota, etc., or do we need to advocate for new laws?
I could jump in with a quick comment that on the table at EU level at the moment is to put CCTV cameras on fishing boats, and that is there entirely related to the existing fishing controls. How many fish have you caught, or how many have you put back today? So I suspect that CCTV on fishing boats may also be an answer to that.
Does anyone else have any pressing, I think?
I'll just add, Wasim, in the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council, one of the primary areas of concern is bycatch that has been for quite many years, particularly in the midwater trawl fisheries for pollock in particular. Salmon bycatch, again, is a traditional subsistence food for Western Alaska villages. And what has happened over the years is a lot of Keta, chum, salmon, and Chinook king salmon bycatch has been a pretty significant issue. There's been a rather large decline in some of those runs to various river systems along Western Alaska. And so on board a lot of these vessels, even Mike's and all of our fleet, the 9 vessels that we own and operate, we do have observers on board. We also have depending on the vessel, there may be cameras like Douglas just mentioned about, actual monitoring of what's coming, through the chute. Is there a species that shouldn't be there? And then there's, it's recorded or and in some cases it's to the extreme that if there is it's not extreme, it's just the reality of where the law is, that if you hit a certain amount of bycatch, it can actually shut the fishery down. For the whole sector. There are current mechanisms in place that could probably be used and or amplified in terms of how do you apply that to the topic that we're here for now in terms of animal welfare.
Thank you, definitely some interesting points. The next question is for Phil/Allison. If we had to prioritize, what would be most tractable? Stunning, slaughter, onboard handling, soak times, site-specific management measures, etc.
Well, we both believe that stunning is the first thing. You ideally want everything. They suffer substantially during capture, during landing, and during slaughter. The danger if you just concentrate on reducing the suffering during capture and landing, which will definitely improve your product quality, is that you land a very, very fully aware fish that then has an absolutely appalling death on board in ice slurry, slowly asphyxiating or even gutting alive. If you want to improve welfare, I think you have to start with stunning, but it is holistic. Once you have got humane stunning, you then also don't want them to die. I mean, many fish die before they're landed. So once you've got stunning on board, you definitely need to address all of those. So it's a holistic process. I think that we know that if you're going to stun that animal, it's going to reduce the suffering, as long as you get the currents right and so forth, that you don't have immobilized fish. That's where I would start. But then you start thinking about all of them, and some of the methods that you catch them with a slower trawl, and you land them via pumping, and then you humanely dispatch them. That's the overall effect. And as I mean, Mike was suggesting, you're then going to have far less cortisol. You're going to have far less. It's going to affect rigor mortis. It's going to affect the quality of the fish. And so, as other people have been saying, that is something else to sell it on. I know that when Fairfish did their trial of fair trade come higher welfare fish capture in Senegal some decades ago, one of the things that they noticed, they were selling some of these fish in Switzerland caught by fair trade fishers in Senegal, that the smell wasn't as bad, the quality was very much better, and all of those things came together. So ultimately holistic, first thing stunning.
Thank you for that. Yeah, definitely makes sense. We actually have another question for you. It just came in. What are factors to consider when choosing the method to capture the fish?
The methods of capture.
Yeah.
I think the most important thing is a method that doesn't damage the fish too much. So if it's a gill net will damage a fish more than, say, a hook does, though a hook may feel bad enough. I wouldn't like one in my mouth, but the fish are less damaged by that. When you start using nets, they get crushed against the net, they get abraded against it. The problems arise, but particularly if it's pulled fast, and your bottom trawler going fast is going to not only use a lot more fuel, it's going to do more damage to fish. So if you have a much slower method like the twin rig or whatever, the Scottish seiner, there's another name for that, fly fishing or something that's gone from my head at the moment, but where you move the thing much more slowly and it's landed, you have a shorter duration and the fish is landed in a better position. So within any method, making it much quicker, the time shorter, I should say, making the speed of the trawl slower so that it's not like fox hunting where you're chasing animals to exhaustion through the water. All of those are going to help. So time and speed, those I think are the key things. Traps may be more humane if they're not left too long, but shall we say you can avoid the risk of damage to the animal. But yeah, Doug, I think, covered quite a number of those in his suggestion.
Exactly. I was going to say, yeah, thanks for that. And I think we already did cover some of that in Doug's presentation. So I'll just field one last question to Mike and Everette. From your perspective, do you have tips for how animal welfare advocates should approach the fisheries industry, keeping in mind that a big part of our audience are animal welfare advocates?
That's a good question. Gosh, I'm not sure. I'm going to have to think about that. I guess just put pressure on to, from the, I'm thinking about like for as a specific chickens and in the whole size of the cage thing that went on not too long ago, and pressure was put on, say, like McDonald's, I think, and eventually McDonald's came out and said, okay, well, we're not going to buy eggs from any producers that don't have a certain size cage for their chickens. So I'm just thinking that, you know, it's along those lines that the pressure is going to have to be brought to the big users to put more concentration on this issue.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you know, I commercially fished for salmon growing up myself, spent time out in the Bering Sea. And if you know the operation side, you know, a lot of the owners and operators, the skippers, the captains, they're very opinionated individuals. And so Mike is actually an anomaly in this whole business, taking a different tact and bringing it to the seafood industry. And what I would recommend is that in terms of advocacy and awareness and education, there's multiple platforms, whether it is I'm just speaking from the United States perspective, where you have multiple federal management councils that oversee, you know, all the various fisheries from coast to coast. That is an avenue. In the state of Alaska, we have Board of Fish, you know, which kind of covers multiple issues. So you have, you know, both the policy and the regulatory side of it. Really, a big part of this too is the ongoing awareness at the market. You know, so I'm talking about category managers, people that are making decisions about, you know, what is being pulled through. I mean, a lot of major broadline food distributors are currently hearing from advocacy groups on animal welfare, not necessarily much on seafood, from what I'm learning. And so I'm helping to educate, along with Mike, some of these. I keep saying major. There's only a handful of majors out there, so I'll keep the names off the conversation. But really, it is there's two of us here, and I know many of you are doing the same thing in your respective parts of the globe. But I think a concerted, you know, effort on policy regulatory side, and then also on the retail food service broadline distribution side as well, that can be accomplished as well. There's just so much unbelievable information just in what I'm hearing here now, that I don't feel like Mike and I are kind of, you know, banging the drum ourselves. And so I think it's more, how do we kind of align this message in a professional manner moving forward. So I'm happy to entertain some of those introductions as well, so that we can try to figure out how to crack some additional doors open to make sure people are learning from what I'm just hearing today. It's been fantastic.
Yes, thank you to Mike and Everett for that. I'm sure many of our audience will appreciate the message and the support. So we're actually out of time. So a big thank you to all our panelists for this engaging session. We ran over time, but it was definitely worthwhile, and I hope that all of you learned as much as I did. Thanks to all the audience members for attending and for the great questions. As always, please keep your eye out for any post-conference communications on ways you can continue to be involved in protecting aquatic animals. And of course, follow us on social media and visit ALI.fish for more information. And a reminder that the Hoover app is still on for more discussions on this topic. We have a 10-minute break right now, but we'll return after that, sticking with the theme of capture fisheries, where we'll be hearing from Benjamin Freeling on how to reduce the catch of wild fish. So see you back here in 10 minutes. And thank you again to all the panelists.